Hello, what's up? How's everybody doing? So I just wanted to turn on the camera today and share some thoughts about a conversation that is currently taking place on X due to the investigative journalism of Jeremy Scahill from Dropsite News. I'm sure if you're watching this video and you've been paying attention to Palestine or any kind of coverage over American imperialism, then of course at some point you've come across the work of Jeremy Scahill. Now in the last 2 years since creating Dropsite, he and many others that are involved in the project have done an excellent job in giving voice to groups that are completely overlooked and ignored in mainstream media, especially in the West. In fact, even in the Muslim world, nobody wants to give a voice to, let's say, Hamas, who's actually been engaged in what Zionists would call a conflict. Really what it is a genocide. But, essentially Hamas is the organization that carried out October 7th, and they've been representing the popular will of the Palestinian people as demonstrated and reflected by the polls in Palestine, and that have shown how unpopular the Palestinian Authority is and how popular resistance groups are, and Hamas as being the largest and longest running resistance organization in Palestine, despite the fact that many people in Gaza are currently questioning why October 7th took place, given that the world did not respond the way that many had hoped, and essentially watched and allowed Israel commit genocide and continue to commit genocide. They're still starving people. They're still not allowing aid into the Strip. They're not allowing places to be rebuilt. They're still hunting down and killing resistance fighters, and they are still bombing and killing journalists and children that are completely uninvolved with resistance actions in Gaza. But despite this, Hamas is still incredibly popular, as we saw a couple years ago, about a month or two after October 7th, in November, December of 2023, when you had the first temporary pause in the genocide, and it lasted about 2 weeks, and Hamas had released many of these young Israeli hostages that were civilians. A lot of them were teenagers. There was the elderly woman who actually, I don't want to say she praised Hamas, but, she condemned Netanyahu, and she had more of a peaceful message, and this was very embarrassing for the Zionists. But when that took place, Israel, in exchange for that release, released Palestinian prisoners, and there were demonstrations in the West Bank where people were praising the resistance and saying that resistance is basically the only way forward. It's the only thing that actually produces results for us. Mahmoud Abbas has been selling out for years. He's made a tremendous amount of money in doing so, and being Israel's useful idiot as a traitor to the Palestinian people, and they've armed him to the point where he can't fight Israel, and he would never fight Israel, but he can actually police his own people. And actually in Jenin, they've carried out certain operations, and Palestinian Authority security forces have been used to suppress the Palestinians. And so anyway, long story short, Jeremy Scahill in Dropsite has been conducting interviews with Hamas. Of all the media platforms that have been covering the ceasefire negotiations and the perspective of Hamas and what they're willing to do, what they're not willing to do, in order to provide people a deeper understanding of how best to resolve this conflict, bring an end to the genocide, and bring some level of justice to the Palestinian people, hopefully in the form of self-determination and a state. They've done a great job in covering the ceasefire proposal, the negotiations, what has been said directly to Hamas. Oftentimes when there are leaked reports where Steve Witkoff says, Hamas told me that they'll disarm, Jeremy Scahill will go directly to Hamas connections that he has and ask them, is that true? And they'll say, no, that's not true at all. We've never said that we'll disarm. And so providing a clear picture of the perspective of resistance forces in the process of these negotiations, which is proper, true journalism, and was what is desperately needed and what has been missing from this over the last 2 years in the Palestine conversation in general. Scahill's done a great job with that. Now, what has gone viral as of late, he has essentially called out, or he's amplified the voices of these Palestinian factions that are opposed to this new bill or this new law that the Palestinian Authority under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas has been trying to pass, and they've already passed actually. And what it is basically is they haven't held election in decades. Okay, this guy's been in power with no elections, and they keep saying that, Hamas never has elections, blah, blah, blah. They just do it to attack the resistance. But really, Mahmoud Abbas hasn't had an election in order to determine what his actual popularity is amongst the people of Palestine. What is actually the will of the Palestinian people? Well, we know it. We hear it every day on social media, and we see it on the streets, and we see it reflected in certain polls. We just haven't seen it reflected in an official election. And the reason why he won't have elections is because he won't win. He's a deeply unpopular candidate. Well, now they're talking about finally having like another round of local elections, right? Not national elections where his position would be threatened, but local elections. And to ensure that only his candidates can win, he has pushed through an incredibly unpopular bill that forces any candidate that decides to run to adhere to decisions and agreements the Palestinian Authority has already made with Israel. One of those, for example, is completely surrendering 78% of historic Palestine, so forfeiting the Palestinian right of return for refugees, completely ignoring the rights of the Palestinians that are currently citizens of Israel that were left behind after 48, and of course endorsing not even a pathway or a process towards the establishment of a Palestinian state. So basically, if you want to run for local elections, you have to submit to what Mahmoud Abbas wants. Now, this is incredibly unpopular amongst opposition factions and figures and movements in Palestine. Obviously, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are these groups that are opposed to it, but there are other groups that are opposed to it as well. It's just incredibly unpopular, but they pushed it through. Now, Jeremy Scahill amplified this, and he put it out in a video, he put it out in a form of tweets, articles, and there was a Palestinian ambassador that replied and started mocking Jeremy Scahill and questioning his intent and basically saying, shut up, stay out of our business. So what this has sparked is a much needed conversation in directing heat towards the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, simply put, is a sellout organization. They serve Israel in helping to occupy Palestine. They preserve the occupation, and they do this as traitors in exchange for money. That's ultimately what it comes down to. If you look at Mahmoud Abbas and others, they are incredibly wealthy people, and you ask, how can they be so incredibly wealthy given that they are under military occupation, that they don't have freedom of movement, that they don't have a healthy economy? And you look at the situation in Palestine, where many people who are funded by the government are dependent on money coming from foreign governments to assist the Palestinian government and assist the Palestinian people. That has to go through America, then go through Israel, and then it is held hostage and used as leverage, and then finally months later it's provided to the Palestinian Authority, who can then also use it as leverage. And so there's filters and speed bumps of leverage before it actually gets to a Palestinian person, and this is used to essentially censor and control Palestinian just as much as the occupation does. And so many people will work for 3, 4, 5, 6 months and never get paid. How do people live like this? Meanwhile, you look at Mahmoud Abbas, and him and his cronies have a tremendous amount of wealth, a lot of property, a lot of assets. They drive fancy cars. They are very wealthy people living it up at the expense of the Palestinian people, and they're only able to do this because they are sellouts. And so Jeremy Scahill now has amplified this by accident, just by doing his reporting and drawing the ire and the attention of this sellout ambassador that is part of the PA, and it is now sparking this conversation that I think is very important, because there are a lot of forces trying to prevent a Palestinian state. Obviously, Israel's the most important one, but you also have the United States. But then you also have Muslims and Arabs, right? Different regimes in the region. Probably the worst one, though, is the Palestinian Authority. They are complicit in holding their own people hostage. Unfortunately for the Palestinian people, whether in Gaza or the West Bank, there are a lot of people standing in their way, including their own brethren. And that is very sad, but that is really the nature of civilization. There have been many examples of this. There have always been people who have sold out this French administration that collaborated with the Nazis in order to help them sustain their occupation during World War II. That's just the most recent example that a lot of people are pointing to, but there are many cases like this all throughout history. So unfortunately for the Palestinians, that story continues. And what's interesting is Hamas over the years has made many concessions, not only in recognizing the state of Israel, which essentially means recognizing that they live on your stolen land, but also they have made concessions and they've made offers to Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, and trying to create a unified government. Now, I'm not trying to play lawyer for Hamas or suggest that they're completely perfect. No, obviously not. But they have made concessions, and I think it's because they are much more serious in actually producing results for the Palestinian people than the Palestinian Authority, which completely benefits from the status quo. And so despite the fact that they've made these propositions, these concessions, these offers to try and establish a unified government so that if there is a Palestinian Authority that becomes a state of Palestine, it will at least govern both the West Bank and Gaza. Now, you would think the Palestinian Authority would want this. You would think Mahmoud Abbas would want this, but he hasn't pushed for it. He hasn't attempted to take it. And when it was essentially offered to him and there was a pathway for it, he didn't act on it. And the reason why he didn't is because his handlers, the Zionists, the Israelis, the Americans, are telling him, we don't consent to this, because that's a threat to Israel. As soon as the Palestinians can become unified under one voice, it then becomes harder for Israel to sustain their occupation, because right now they get to use the excuse of, well, you guys are divided. This group is a threat to us. That group is a threat to us. But all of that gets tossed out if you can at least have one unified Palestinian voice, one unified Palestinian government with elections in which the majority of the Palestinian people have had their will reflected and expressed through these elections and choosing a new candidate. Obviously, that wouldn't be Mahmoud Abbas. But the point is, one body representing the Palestinian people, getting their rights, and that's a threat to Israel. And that's why they use their leverage, whether it's money or blackmail or violence, over Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority to say, you better not do that. And that's why they've never done it. And that's why they never will do it, which is why the Palestinian Authority needs to be set aside. They need to be dismantled. They are a corrupt organization that is complicit in the occupation and the oppression of their own people. And until that's settled, I don't think we're going to see any progress. So it's great to see that this conversation is taking place yet again. Hopefully this time it'll take place in a way that can actually produce some sort of results. And that's because of the investigative reporting by Jeremy Scahill and Dropsite News, which, isn't just possible because of them. Obviously, many other Palestinian organizations and activists and academics and journalists have contributed to this. As Western journalists, I think they should be applauded for their work, standing against the mainstream, taking that risk of amplifying voices that no one wants to listen to in the power structures, whether it's in the Middle East or the West. And so credit to them. I'm going to include a link to this reporting by Jeremy Scahill and the tweet as well in the description of this video. So let me know what you think in the comment section and click those links if you want to learn more. Thank you. Take care of yourselves.
Trust nothing. No